Hi, this is Alan from Warrendale Community Church. We're continuing our study on proving out the will of God or understanding the will of God, and this particular aspect is that we have begun a section about choosing within the freedoms. Part of this whole subject is related to, in the context of 1 Corinthians 8, and that's about meat sacrificed to idols. What we talked about already, these are choices at which we logically use facts, but we have to realize edifying is to be the primary driving force, not just knowledge. So it's both knowledge and love. And he already talked about that aspect. We looked at, last time, we began the process of looking at the fact, or the primary fact about who God is. And this is where we get into the idea of from Him, through Him, and for Him. These three principles of source, means, and goal are used within this area of freedom to help to discern that which is best, that which is going to honor God, and for us to make such a choice. So we realize, and I'll kind of review a little bit in verse 6, 1 Corinthians 8:6. Yet for us there is but one God, the Father, from whom are all things, and we exist for Him, and one Lord Jesus Christ, by whom are all things, and we exist through Him. So the idea of that there's one God, He is the Father, He is the source of all things, and so we go through our area of freedom. Is He the source of it? Are we existing through Him? But this particular area of freedom related to the topic of meat sacrificed to idols really picks up its point from living through Christ. How would Christ live? How do I live through Christ? Does it really pass that test? And if it doesn't pass that test, then the thing is that it's not an area in which is the will of God or acting out the will of God in freedoms. So the thing is that we realize that the realization that idols are nothing and that God is the source of everything, both of those facts, especially probably related to the facts related to that an idol is nothing, not everybody, weaker brother talking about, have this solid basis of fact. So we have to factor in these facts related to others if we want to live through Christ. And not all believers have the same functioning relationship to facts. And that's brought out in verse 7. However, not all men have this knowledge, but some, being accustomed to the idols until now, eat food as if it were sacrificed to an idol, and their conscience being weak is defiled. This clear knowledge related to the absence of any substance concerning idols is not universally understood for all believers, particularly the weak. The weaker brother who is accustomed to engagement with the idol has a problem with this meat. They have a past, and they have in the past made a direct connection from the meat to the idol that was being sacrificed to. So the means of living Christ has to take into account the true effect it has on my brother and his weakness. His awareness is not fully informed, this weaker brother, which would not allow him to involve himself with an idol meat without being defiled by it. A participation in this area would not allow him to be pure and without stain, for he would think he has corrupted himself. So, the means of living through Christ has to factor in to determine whether it is a negative, neutral, or positive effect for others, and then determine not to have a negative effect, particularly with our areas of freedom that in chapter 8. If our area of liberty has a neutral effect, then the other principles that we looked at of testing can give you the green light or the go-ahead. This particular test of means relates to my fellow weaker brother, not to the people of the world at large. That's a different topic in chapter 9. These areas are non-essential in the living of the Christian life. This is not about a legalistic believer who condemns all forms of liberty, but a weaker brother struggling to stay pure. A refusal to factor in this possible effect concerning your liberty is an indicator of a person's knowledge with arrogance. Further factoring, it goes on, factoring about food and how food is neutral to God and food itself is not itself edifying. Verse 8, but food will not commend us to God, for we are neither the worse if we do not eat or the better if we do eat. Food doesn't commend me in any way to God. The idea of commend is to place alongside God in such a way as to make one close. Food will not make you closer to God nor farther away. The eating or not eating in this subject of idol meat has no advantage or disadvantage when it comes to making me close to God. But how you think about its effects toward a weaker brother does matter. This meat subject or liberties can have a neutral effect toward a relationship with God. Let's factor in some other elements that he gives us, factoring in the outcome toward certain categories, making sure the facts are used to edify my brother. When freedoms become a trip hazard. Verse 9. But take care that this freedom of yours does not somehow become a stumbling block to the weak. The air of caution regarding my liberties is how it might negatively impact the weak. The proper way of the will of God in liberties are to cause no stumbling. A stumbling block is a trip hazard that can cause the weak to sin. This is similar to Matthew chapter 8, verse 6. Whoever causes one of these little ones who believes in me to stumble, it would be better for him to have a heavy millstone hung around his neck and to be thrown into the depth of the sea. Woe to the world because of its stumbling blocks, for it is inevitable that some stumbling blocks come, but woe to that man through whom the stumbling blocks come. There are many types of stumbling blocks. We just don't want to be the originator. We don't want to be the person causing other people to stumble because of the punishment, the danger of it. Some stumbling blocks are over the truth. That's a different area. They create offense, but this is not the point here. Like in Matthew chapter 11, verse 6, it says, and blessed is he who does not take offense at me, talking about Christ. Or in John 6:61, but Jesus, conscious that his disciples grumbled at this, said to them, does this cause you to stumble? He's talking about the seriousness and the devotion of being a follower of Christ and not holding anything back. So the word, back to 1 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 9, the word liberty is the ideal of authority. Has the basic ideal of having the right to speak or act in a situation without looking or waiting for approval. This liberty is a freedom of choice, or a right to act regarding a lawful area. The evaluation of your fellow Christian is required in the proving, which itself is hard and is very personal. It is that I have to consider a weaker brother. I have to, in a sense, think about what this weaker brother is. And even in a pride standpoint, they say, oh, that's a weaker brother. He doesn't know very much. Well, the whole point is that I need to think about him. And the thing is that it doesn't mean that I have to have a weaker brother. I have to think about that weaker brother. It may not matter to you if someone stumbles because of your freedom activities, but it does to God. And he factors in that to his relationship with you. Some turn and become offended and use it as a weapon to justify their sin. Some stumbling is self-induced. But the thing is, you just don't want to be involved in causing people to stumble for the wrong reason. God can factor in to your relationship by bringing correction and withholding blessing if you cause other people to stumble, or even if you're in your mind think that there's no problem causing people to stumble if you don't even know if they do. Let's look at this in further the impact of your actions in verse 10. For if someone sees you, who has knowledge, dining in an idol temple, will not his conscience, if he is weak, be strengthened to eat things sacrificed to idols? This possible scenario kind of gives the indication that it doesn't necessarily that you have a targeted person, because this person doesn't see the other person, just may happen to see. It makes you factor into your thinking your freedom and to make it a blessing. The one being seen is the one who has the knowledge concerning the idol meat. The one observed is the weaker brother. The dining is taking place kind of basically, it's the Artemis diner type of an idea at the idol temple. The weaker brother does not see it as just another place to dine, but connects the eating to idolatry and has his problem about being defiled. This provides a strengthening to him to eat the things sacrificed to idols by this observed awareness. The person has lessened his conscious resistance, the person who is knowingly doing this, in this area of personal hazard by seeing him eat there. So the idea is that that has to be thought about when carrying out your rights. Another aspect is factoring the death of Christ. Verse 11, for through your knowledge he was ruined, the weak who is weak is ruined, the brother for whose sake Christ died. Well, what it really brings into the idea is that if you think about this weaker brother, remember Jesus picked him, Jesus chose him, and you have to factor in, he is important enough to Jesus to pick him. The weaker brother is destroyed in the use of your knowledge. Is that what you think about the death of Christ? Is that what you think about the provision of Christ? The thought that needs to be factored into your decision with freedom is the possible ruin caused to a person saved by Jesus. Would the way you live for Christ include ruining those Christ died for? I hope not. Do you think ruining the one who is weak will be without personal backlash or loss from God? I don't think so. The death of Christ for that brother should weigh heavy upon you because of its importance to you. Your appreciation for the death of Christ is added into this area concerning the weaker one. He explains even further the cost and what has to be factored in, sinning against Christ indirectly. Verse 12, and so by sinning against the brother and wounding their conscience when it is weak, you are sinning against Christ. See, the way to live through Christ would not be by wounding the weaker brother's warning system. To live by Christ and for Christ would not be sinning against Christ. The areas of freedom for you are better understood when you view it with this weaker brother scenario in mind, for it reveals your love or your arrogance. Love overrules our freedom. Verse 13. Therefore, summarizing, if food causes my brother to stumble, I will never eat meat again, so that I will not cause my brother to stumble. So the thought might work like this. I need to consider my weaker brother in the matter because that is what Christ would do, because Christ died for him. To sin against Christ by sinning against my brother would not be living through Christ likeness. So if I come to the conclusion in my mind that something might cause my brother to stumble, love would direct me not to eat this meat again or carry out that liberty. The love of this kind of brother determines my choice in the area and reveals my thoughts. So, these choices are your choices, but also the consequences are your consequences. One must factor in the right variables with the correct balancing to determine the best use of freedom. Treat others as you would like or think Jesus would treat them. Kind of taking the golden rule in a different direction. If your thinking is wrong, he will teach you. And the thing is, just have to realize that some of the consequences may come in this area, but this is how we work through the will of God in the area of freedoms.